This conference will now be recorded.
So in our previous class, we were working about the about the importance of clipboard and the activities, right? So using with the activities or the report definition, we will be seeing that it will be hitting the database those many times. Suppose if I want to use this particular activity or the report definition as the source for one of the drop down, for how many times I use the drop down, those many times it is hitting the data page. And in turn, it has to hit uh, it has to generate that source rule those many times, and it has to hit the database those many times, and it has to create the clipboard pages also. So this seems to be much repetitive process. So that's why PRPC encourages to go for data pages. So the importance of this data pages is for the first time it will be hitting the database, it will be pulling the data, and it will be storing it on the clipboard. And from the next time, if we want to make use of that particular data, PRPC can able to identify whether that particular page is already existing in the clipboard or not. If it is there, then source rule will not be executed, and it will not hit the database. Okay, so that is the thing we have discussed. So Uma, I'm muting you. So if you want to unmute, just do from your end, okay? So this is the data type what we have created for the states. And if you're trying to create any of the data type, PRPC will be creating data pages and the report definition. Okay, so we are discussing about the data pages. So as discussed, data pages will be having two structures, that is the page one and the list one. And if you want to pull single instance from this particular data class, we have to go for page structure. Okay, so if I run this, I'll be getting only one instance. And if I want to get multiple instances from this particular data class, then we have to go for list structure. So in PRPC, we'll be having two types of structures for the data page. This will be important questions in interview. So the structures of the data pages will be page and list. So with the page, we can able to pull only one instance at a time from the particular data class. And with the list, we can able to get multiple instances. This is what we have discussed. And now if we just run this, if we just give this data page as a source to this particular drop down, so this is the place, right? So for this drop down, I'm trying to give the data page as a source. So whenever this particular section has been loaded, it has to execute the source rule first. Then it will be, it has to load this control, and this control has to load this source, and this source has to execute this data page. And before executing this data page, it has to check in the clipboard whether this particular page is already there or not. If it is there, it will not execute the source rule, meaning data page will not be executed again and again. And here in this scenario, we have to use this multiple instances. That's why we are going for the list structure. This is also we have discussed, and if you want, and we have discussed about the scope as well. And if I'm trying to define this particular data page through to this thread level, meaning the data what I'm trying to create in this work object, so as part of the work object in the clipboard, that will be there only for the life of that work object. If I'm creating one new work object ID, okay. So you understood about the scope now? Do you want me to explain again? So you forgot, or shall I explain again? We have already discussed about the scope. If you want me to explain, I can able to do that. Else I think you'll be good.
Can you explain once, because it's like
Sure. I can explain, but I thought if I explain it again, you will be feeling bored further. So I thought of checking with you. That's it. Yeah. So by default, the data pages will be of three scopes, that is thread, requester, and node. So whenever I'm trying to create one data page, whenever I'm trying to create one work object ID. So now if we just check in the clipboard, that data page will not be there. Why? Because we are not executing the source rule. Source rule will be executed whenever we are loading that control. No? So if we just check in the clipboard, that will not be there. If you want, you can able to check. As I told you, data pages will be under data pages category. Expand this, there will not be any data page like hospital list. Now click on submit. Now we can able to see all the list coming here. So since we are getting the list, it has to be stored into clipboard. So I think source has been already generated. It has hit the database and it will be pulling the data. Now if we just click on clipboard again, where is it? So did I change the request? Did I change the scope or what? So let me save this. Did we make any changes? Why it is not showing the thread?
I think last time we make it a scope, right?
Yeah, we made it to
Request.
request, correct? Yeah.
Yeah.
Maybe that is the thing. I'll tell you the importance why what I'm doing it now. So now I'm trying to create one new work object. So now the data page will not be there. Now we should be having the data page ready onto the clipboard under thread level. One second. So the source of this is data page only, and for this report definition, okay. So we should be having one data page ready here. Underscore hospital list. So we're getting it here. So one thing, let me log off and log in. Why? Because whatever the data page that is already created, it is with the operator one. Earlier we have seen, right? This is with the operator scope. So if I just log off and log in, that will be gone. So first let me check for the data page. So earlier, are we making changes with the state data page or what? It's still showing requester.
It was hospital.
Okay. So now I'm trying to create one new work object. So let me check in the clipboard as well. It should not be there. So under thread, it is not there, and under requester also it should not be there. Okay. So now I'm clicking on submit. So source rule will be executed by this time and we'll be getting the data ready, and we have to just check in the clipboard whether we got it ready or not. We are seeing the data. So whenever this particular flow action is being loaded, we can able to see this section loading, and we can able to see this control loading, and this control will be loading the source for that, and source here is given as a data page, and the data page will be loaded and stored it in the clipboard. This is what we are seeing. Now if I'm trying to create one more work object ID, so this is what we are seeing for the chg42, and the clipboard is also the same. And now if I'm trying to create new work object ID and click on submit, okay, now I'm trying to just check for the clipboard for chg43. So earlier we have seen one data page created like d underscore hospitalist. Now are we getting it now? We're not getting. And if I just click on submit button and click on clipboard, now if we just check in the thread level, it is creating. So the thing what we have to understand here is, if that particular data page is of thread level, this data page will be accessible only to that thread. So whichever the thread is creating this work object ID, that data page will be useful only for that data for that thread. Got my point? So thread meaning work object ID only. So chg43 is responsible for creating this particular data page. And now if you are trying to create one more work object ID like chg44, you cannot able to see this data page data in that clipboard. Okay, if you want to get that hospital list into the clipboard, then you have to go to the fourth screen, and fourth screen will be again generating the source rule, and by that time there will not be data on the clipboard, and source rule has to be executed, and it has to interact with the database, it has to generate the queries, it has to pull the data from database and store it on the clipboard. Okay, and if then and we can able to use the data in the same work object within number of screens. If I just click on submit button, still the page will be there. Why? Because we're still in the CHG42 only. If I just click on clipboard, the data page should be there. Why? Because the scope of this particular data page should be of thread level. So wherever I am there in this particular work object level, I might be in the first screen or the 10th screen. If I'm creating this particular source rule in the first screen, then this particular data page will be created to that particular thread itself, and I can able to access the data throughout my work object life. Okay, and the data what I'm trying to pull here to display here is then hospital values. No, so this will be most generic. There is no much security here. There is no much security. And if I want to use this data for the next work object ID, okay, for the first work object ID, I'm trying to hit the database for one time, and I can able to create this work object IDs for some millions per day. Suppose if I'm creating some hundreds of work object IDs with my operator ID per day, and you might be creating some hundreds, and other operator like Tulani can able to create some other work object IDs. So per day we are almost creating 400 to 500 work object IDs, and for each and every work object, if it is hitting the database for in order to show the same data, so this doesn't seems to be the generic one. Instead, if I can able to maintain this work object data for all the work objects, okay, if I'm just trying to make this data page data for all the work objects, then number of hitting to the database will be reduced, right? So instead of we having 500 hits for the database in order to get some most generic data which is not at all meant for security, okay, then I can able to change the scope of this. If I just change the scope of this particular work object, sorry, particular data page, which where I can able to maintain it for across whole work objects, then we can able to change this to requester. Getting my point? If I'm trying to have this work data page as a thread level, so for only for that particular work object ID I can able to use this data page. If I'm trying to create new work object ID, I cannot able to use this data page data. So for the second work object ID, if I want to use the data page data, it has to hit the database again. So likewise it has to have number of hits, and if the another requester or operator is trying to do the same, he has to have those many number of hits, those many times those many work objects he's creating, those many hits has to be done from his end as well. Likewise I can able to have some millions of I can able to have some developers in my organization. For each and every operator and for each and every work object ID, if it is hitting those many times, I cannot able to feel that this is a best practice. Okay, so instead if we just change the scope to requester, if I just change the scope to requester, I have just changed it, and now I'm trying to create the new work object ID. So by this time I should be having the sorry, we have not created, right? So understanding both of you. So just I clicked on submit button, and it has to create the work object, sorry, it has to create the data page onto the clipboard. So just click on clipboard, open the data pages, open the thread. So we should not be finding that particular data page into this thread. If any of the data pages, these are all OOTP data pages, so all these data in these data pages are to be meant only for this particular thread. CHG44 is one of the thread level, and whatever all the OOTP data pages or the user defined data pages has to be used only for this thread. So in earlier class when we are working with attachments, as I told you, whenever we are attaching some documents as part of work object ID, that will be stored into two different pages. One is PY attachment page. If you don't remember also, no issues, we'll discuss about this as well. And the other thing is D attachment list. Okay, this will be under thread scope. Why? Because the attachments what I'm attaching for this thread will be useful for only this thread, right? So that's why this is one of the data page that has to be created under thread scope. All these OOTB data pages are to be used for this thread only, and there will be some data pages under the requested level also. So these all the data pages which we are creating or which OOTB which are already OOTB, this will be across my operator level. Operator requester meaning nothing like an operator. So if I just log off and log in, all this data will be gone. Data will be reset. So now the changes what we are making is this data page seems to be generic, and I want to use this particular data page data in all the work object IDs what I'm creating. So I am one operator and I want to use this data page data for hundreds of work object IDs I'm creating now. Okay, so instead of having those many times database hit, those many times resource source executing, what I want to do is I want to use this data page which is created for the first time. It will be stored into the clipboard, and I want to use the same clipboard data to all the work object IDs which I am creating. Requester meaning only myself. You will not be given access to my clipboard. Okay, the data page list I'm creating here will be stored into my clipboard only, and it will be stored in on the requester level. Here we can able to see. Okay, so if I'm trying to create one more work object ID, as I told you, the data pages under this requester will be permanent as soon, until I log in. So irrespective of number of work object IDs I create and irrespective of number of navigations I do, this will not be affected. This will be based on my operator login. If I just log off, all this data will be gone, or if the server is restarting, the data will be gone. And if it is crossing 24 hours after this page creation, data will be lost. For security reasons, all the data pages will be there in clipboard for only 24 hours. Okay, so we have created new work object ID, and if we click on clipboard, this particular data page should be accessible for this work object ID like chg45 also. So open the data page, open the requester. Here we can able to see. Okay, so before we are going to the fourth screen where the source role has to be executed, we are having this data page ready. Okay, if I'm trying to create some hundreds of work object IDs also, for each and every work object, this page will be ready. Why? Because I have created this, and this will be accessible as soon, until I log off. So that's the importance of requester level. Okay, so we are three developers, let us say, and I am the requester, and this particular data page has been given with the requester level. If I log in into my if I log in at 9 a.m. our time, 9 a.m., then so the first data page will be created at 9 a.m. Okay, if this particular data page is of given requester level, and if I'm trying to run one work object ID at 9 a.m., the source rule will be executed and it will be executing this data page. Data page has to hit the database and it has to store the data. So at 9 a.m., I'll be having this data page ready in my clipboard. And if suppose Uma or someone logging at 10 a.m., and if they want to create the work object ID, so till they reach the screen number 4, they will not be given access, they will not be having this data page ready on their clipboard. So if they're logging at 10 o'clock, then after they covering the fourth screen, which is responsible for hitting the database, then only one data page will be created in their clipboard. And whatever the clipboards, sorry, whatever the data pages I have in my clipboard and in your clipboard, Tulani cannot able to access. If she want to access, she has to create the new request, that is like creating the new work object ID, and after she going to the fourth screen, then the source rule has to be executed, data page will be created. So if she is doing it 11 o'clock, data page will be there at 11 o'clock. And if I am not logging off, okay, suppose if I am logging off at 10 o'clock, so the data page what I have created has created at 9 a.m. and if I am logging off at 10 o'clock, and am I logging back again? So if I just trying to create any of the work object ID till the screen number 3, so before the screen number 4, I will not be having the data page ready on my clipboard. I have to go to the fourth screen. Fourth screen is responsible for generating the source, and then new clipboard page will be created at 10 a.m. Okay, getting my point? And if suppose Uma logs off, sorry, if Uma is not logging off, she has created his first work object ID at 10 a.m. and she is not logging off, and by default for the next day till 9:59 minutes, 9 or 59 minutes, she can able to access the same data by default. At 10 o'clock, again, if she is running the new work object ID, she will not be having the data page ready onto the clipboard for the first three screens. For the fourth screen, again it has to hit the database and it has to interact with the database, generate the queries, and it has to create the new data page. So this is how requester will be doing. So if I just log off, everything will be gone. All the databases will be gone for the security reasons. Okay, and if I just restart the server, the main server, so not the personal edition server, this is okay. And if we restart the main PRPC server, even then also data will be gone. Okay, got my point? And this is of requester level. And suppose the work the data page data what I'm trying to create now is to be used by both of you. So this seems to be common, right? I'll be creating few work object IDs today, and Uma as well will be creating few work object IDs with her operator ID, and Tulani will be creating some work object IDs from her end. And whatever the data that has to be displayed in this states dropdown or hospital dropdown seems to be very generic. So if I log in at 9 a.m., the work object ID has to be created and the data page will be ready. And if the same data wants to be used by some other operator also, irrespective of number of logins. Okay, if I'm not giving this particular data page access to other people who are in the same organization, then they have to hit the database again, and the other people has to hit the database again. If I'm having 100 people working in my company, 100 times it has to hit the database. In order to just maintain this constant data, it need not hit 100 times. So in that scenarios, we'll be changing the scope to node. Okay, if I'm just changing the scope to node, then the data page what it is created will be at the node level. Node meaning server level. Okay, so if I just log in at 9 a.m. in the next day office, if I just create the first work object ID, then this particular data page will be created at 9 a.m. And if we log in at 10 a.m. or 11 a.m., so as soon as you create the work object ID, before going to the screen number 1 only, you will before going to the screen number 4, you will be having this data page ready onto your clipboard also. Why? Because the data page what I am requesting initially will be of node level, and who all are connected to that particular node can able to access the data page. If I just log off also, it will not be affected for you as well as for me. Okay, why? Because this is at the node level. So all the node level things will be stored under this node operations, I mean node category. Okay, so if I just log off also, I am the requester, I am the person who has requested for that particular data page, and I am responsible for creating the data page. Even though I log off from the server, it will be still accessible for you as well as for me also if I log in back again. Why? Because this is given with the node level. Who all are connected to that particular node can able to give an access to this. So if I have 10 people working in my organization, and if I'm the first person to request this particular data page, and by default this data page will be accessible by all the 10 persons for the next 24 hours. Okay, so that is the thing. If we feel the data seems to be very generic like states or hospital drop down, we can able to create the data pages with that node level. And if you feel any of the data seems to be very data seems to be secure and which will be useful only for your requester. Suppose I am working on this one, I am working on the claiming insurance application, and you are working on some other thing like vehicle application. Although we both are working on one organization, I'll be working for one implementation applications like claims, and you people are working on another application like vehicle insurance. Okay, so I will be creating the work object IDs related to my medical insurance, and you will be creating work object IDs related to your vehicle insurance. Whatever the work object ID, sorry, whatever the data page I'm creating now, it will be accessible. Sorry, it has to be useful to all the work object IDs what I am creating. So in that case, I'll be creating this data page with the requester level. Why? Because this data page will be accessible only to me, right? It will not be accessible to you. If I just want to share it to you, meaning if I'm trying to create this in the node level, there is no use for you as well. So what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to pull one state hospital list, and I'm hospitalist, and I'm working in this claims application, and you are working with vehicle application. The hospital list, you cannot able to make any use of this particular list, right? So I will not be giving access to the, in that case I will be creating this requester level. Okay, and there will be cases where we have to create the data page for this particular thread. Okay, suppose if you are working in any call center application, that's also internal application only, no? If you are working in any call center application, when our customer calling to me, automatically one work object ID will be initiated. So once he calls, I will be getting all his details pulled with the database, and it will be stored into the data page. And the data what is created now, I can able to use this data across all the screens of that particular work object. Okay, if I'm just disconnecting the call with that particular person, if another person is calling me, then I have to get the data page, the same data page with the fresh data. So the first customer one details will be different to the customer two details. Okay, in this kind of things, if anything seems to be much generic to the particular work object, we have to create it in the thread level. If anything seems to be widely used across the operator within many work object IDs, then we have to go for the requester level. And in this kind of scenarios where hospitalist or anything, if we all three are connected to one node, then we can able to create this particular data page with the node level. So these three are important. They will be asking you many questions on this scope. Understood? So if we just log off, or if the server node level, meaning the data will be gone after 24 hours, and if the main server is restarted also, data will be gone then and there. Maybe after 1 minute, after creating the data page, after 1 minute, if you are restarting the main server, who are all connected to that, then the data page will be gone. Again, when you are creating the new work object ID, one request will be sent, and it will be generating the source rule, and it will be creating this data page onto the node level. Then we can able to access, all the people connected to the particular node can able to access. Understood this about the scope, both of you?
Yes, Chandra.
And Guma, you also know? Okay. And if you are making this as a node, how PRPC will be knowing? There will be many nodes. So in one organization, there will be many nodes. Nodes will be defined based on the access group. So on selecting the node, if we just save this, it will be throwing error, saying like it will be coming to the next tab and asking us to select the access group. Access group is nothing like an one kind of access levels. I will be given one access group, and you will be given another access group. If I'm working in a claims application, my access group will be different, and if you are working in a vehicle application, your access group will be different. So access group meaning it will be defining this particular operator has to be connected to which application. Okay, suppose if we three are connected with one application, if we three are the developers working for the single claims application, then access group will be same for our three. Okay, so I'll be defining one access group, and you will be given with the same access group, and I will be given with the same access group. So access group will be defined at the operator level. We'll work on that. So based on the access group only, node level will be defined. Suppose if you are given with the vehicle application, your access group will be like vehicle application access group, and my access group will be like medical application access group. So whatever the data page I'm creating, it will be accessible to the access group what it is there here. If it is there like medical access group, then if who are all connected to this particular access group can able to see this particular data page on their node level. Understood? And other thing is, if you are selecting thread scope or the requester scope, you will not be finding this access group. Okay, why? Because thread and thread and as well as the requester, this can able to be accessible only by me, right? So if I'm creating any work object ID, so this particular data page will be accessible only with my login, and that too within one work object ID, that is secondary. Only I can able to access this data. And if I'm giving any any data page created with the requester level, and even then also only I can able to access this data. So there is no possibility of interacting with the interacting with the next operator. So there is no concept of access group if you are not going for node level. Understood? This is also important. So in interviews, how they will be asking, so they will be asking you, like, if there is one data page which is of requester level and you and I are connected to single access group. So if I create the data page and if we are connected with the same access group, can you able to see this requester data page on your clipboard or not? So this kind of questions they will be asking. You have to say, like, if it is of requester, there is no question of access group. Why? Because the data page is created with this thread and the requester is not meant for sharing with the other people. If it is of node level, we can able to share it to the persons who are connected to the access group. Understood? And now the data page, there should be one source for this data page. Now if you scroll down, data pages will be having many sources. So I can able to get the data onto this data page by running one activity. Using activities like using obj browser, obj open, I can able to pull the data, right? Okay, I can, there are many sources here. I can able to connect, sorry, I can able to have the data page ready onto the clipboard. So ultimately what we are seeing by default, the data page data is getting by report definition. So this is what we have already seen. If I just open it here, we can able to see the data page that PRPC has created for us. Okay, so this is the data page which is considered as a source to the, sorry, this is the report definition which is considered as a source to the data page. So instead of I giving a report, instead of I running the report definition and putting this data onto the data page and giving this as a source, I can directly give this report definition as the source, right? So before this approach, what we have done, we have just given this report definition as the direct source to my dropdown. Now, if I'm going with these data pages, ultimately it is pulling the data from report definition only. We can able to see it here. So the data source for this data page is report definition. So whatever the data, whatever the report definition we have used as a source, the same report definition has been used in the data pages. So if I run this if I'm running one work object ID, initially it will be running the source rule. Source rule here it is showing like a data page. So data page has to be executed first, and in turn it has to execute one report definition. And finally, report definition has to interact with the database. It has to generate the queries. It has to pull the data and pull it back, and it has to finally store it in the data page. Okay, instead of we going this kind of approach, if I directly give this report definition as a source to the drop down, that will be something like a less difficulty for the PRPC, right? You understood? So instead of we calling two different rules in order to get the same output, I can able to have only one rule executed. If I directly give this report definition as a source, I can able to see the data. But here the advantages with this data page is only for the only for the first time it will be hitting the database. Okay, so database has a mechanism to make the processing stopped if it is already there on the clipboard. If I'm directly using this report definition as the source for the drop down, it will not be identifying whether that particular data is already there on the clipboard or not. So whenever I'm trying to refresh or when I'm trying to create the new work object ID, it has to blindly interact with the database. But the advantages with this data pages is it will not be acting blindly. Once the data has been pulled out, it might be from either any source. It might be using activity, or it might be using the report definition, or it might be using the data transform, or it might be using the integrations, anything. So how are we getting the data onto the data page is not the question. So finally, if we are integrating any of the rules with this data page can able to hold the data for longer period of time, and it can able to just check whether the particular page is already there on the clipboard. So that's why we are following this two-step approach. Okay, so the sources, if we check here, will be seeing the same. So I can able to run one activity. We have already created one activity and we are giving that as a source for the clipboard page. And the same thing, we can able to use the activity also. If we use the activity, once the data and in the data page, and this data page is given as a source to the drop down, then initially data page has to be loaded, and it will be loading the activity for the first time. It will be interacting, it will be pulling the data, and finally it has to be stored in the clipboard. And from the next time, this data page source will not be executed. If this database source is not being executed, activity will not be executed, and or the report definition will not be executed. So the source rule will not be executed here. So data page has a mechanism to identify whether the data page is already there or not. So this is the biggest advantage, and this is one of the biggest disadvantage also, I'll tell you. So till now you understood, no? Both of you?
Yes, Chandra.
Guma, any confusions?
No. Yeah, I'm ready.
Clear, right? Okay.
Yeah.
So source might be anything. For the first time only, it has to execute this two-level rule execution. And from the next time, it will be very, very easy for PRPC to maintain that data instead of hitting the rule each and every time. So that is the thing. We can able to go for the integrations also by using these connectors. We'll work on. And we have to discuss something like mode as well. So there will be three modes. This has been introduced from the eighth version only. So mainly we'll be using read-only mode and editable mode. So if I just run the work object ID, this data page will be stored with the requester level or the node level based on the scope. It has to be created in the data page. And if I'm trying to create it in the requester level, okay, meaning only I can able to access this data. And if I'm trying to create it in the thread level, even then also only I can able to access the data. If I'm creating any data page at the node level, okay, node level meaning whatever the data page I'm creating, it has to be accessible and has to be shared across. Okay, so if that is the case, if this data page is meant for sharing, if I'm creating this work object ID, if Umar Tulani has given rights to make the modifications to the data page from their clipboard, if that is the case, then there will be security reasons, there will be security issues. So the data page which is created seems to be static, and I want to make this constant. It has not to be editable by anyone. So that's why if you're selecting this read only meaning the data page will be having three scopes. Okay, so requester meaning thread meaning I can able to have this work object ID created and only I can able to use. Okay, and if it is of requester also only I can able to use, and if it is of node level we all can use. Now if I'm just changing this to editable meaning we can able to see the scope as two only. This is also very important. So thread and the requester node level will not be there. Why? Because whatever the data page I am creating, I am requesting, it has to be editable. So that is the thing we are selecting here. If I'm making this data page as an editable, then only I will be given access. Who is requesting for this data page, only he can able to edit the data. This data page will not be shared for Umar Tulani. Okay, this particular editable mode will not be accessible at the node level. Got my point? If I'm making this as an editable with the thread or the requester, I can able to make any modification. Why? Because I am the requester. For security reasons, if it is of editable, we cannot able to make this applied across node level. So if it is editable and if I put it across the node level, and if I'm the requester and you few people are making some modifications from the clipboard from your end, okay, and whatever the data we have in the database and whatever the changes you are making, both are different. Okay, so this seems to be much security violations. So that's why if you are selecting editable mode, there will not be node level. Even in the interviews also they will be asking you. Suppose if you are selecting editable mode and if we are given with the access group and if you want to make changes, how it will be reflected in your clipboard. So these kind of silly questions, it might be silly from their end. So if you are not having proper knowledge on this particular rule, we will be thinking that it's a valid question. Okay, so if it is of node level, we cannot, sorry, if it is of editable, we cannot able to make modifications. That's why it will not be given with the node scope. Suppose if I'm just saving this, so this is of editable mode and this is of thread. I'm saving this. Now I'm trying to create one new work object ID. So clipboard should not be there. This is of given thread scope, right? Yeah. So now I'm just checking on clipboard. So it is not there. And even the requester, and the requester is also not there. Now I'm just clicking on submit. So now this particular section has to be loaded. It has to load the source rule, right? Now I'm clicking on clipboard. So this is of thread scope. Okay. One second, I'll tell you. So I'm trying to create one new work object ID. What I did was I have just made these changes to thread. That's it. And it is of editable mode. You think as of now. So by this time there should not be data created here. So there is no data page existing either in the requester or in the thread level. So we're getting the data ready, meaning it has to be stored into the clipboard. So open the clipboard. So actually we should not be getting the data. I should have to log off and log in. That's okay. You try it. So the thing what I'm trying to say here is, if I'm trying to make this particular data page as editable, then we will be getting that page loaded onto the user pages. So you just log off and log in. You will not be seeing the data page onto the data pages. So you'll be getting the page created on the user pages. This is very important. So if you are making any of the editable mode page, the page will be created under the user pages, and all the pages which are created under this user categories are meant for editable. So Pega page we have seen, right? This will be created under user pages. So that is meant for editing. I can able to set any values in order to test for the runtime. Similarly, for the hospital list also. So this seems to be editable. This has to be edited only by my operator ID. So I can able to see all the data here. Okay. So if I want to make any changes, anything here, I'm giving something like this. Save. So this is just for testing purpose. So now refresh. So are we seeing the value updated here? Okay. So what I'm trying to say is, if we are making any of the data page as editable, then we can able to see only thread and the requester scope. Only the person who has requested for this data page can able to make the modifications. And if it is of editable mode, the data pages will be created under user category, user pages. Okay, where we can able to edit the data and where we can able to use it for the testing, whether it is reflecting correctly or not. So understood, right? Now let me tell you one more thing. So I'm making this as read only and saving it now. Let me log off and log in. Why? Because sometimes we are making this as a requester level also. So this is the small issue with the data pages. So all the time we have to log off if it is of requester level. I'll tell you, there is one disadvantage as well. So this is my data page, and this is of read only and thread scope. Now I'm trying to create one new work object ID. So now data page will be created and we can able to see this data. Okay. And now if we get a requirement where you have to make the modifications. So this is the hospital list what we are getting now. Okay. And now we have to add one more thing. So for that, what we have to do? So if we get a requirement to add one more hospital in the list, what we have to do? We have to go to that particular data class and we have to add it there. Let me do that. Okay, so I just want to add one more record here, and I'm putting like AP0 just to come at the top. That's it. I'm saving this. So this is the record what I have added. Now I have just saved this. Now if we refresh this, or if you do anything within this work object ID, data page will not be created. So are we getting the data now? Are we getting the data what we have just made the changes? So I have just added few things, and now I'm trying to delete this. I want to delete this also. I'm trying to delete this as well, and click on save. I'm trying to refresh again. So is that getting updated? I have deleted first three, and I have first thing should be like, it should be starting with GGH. But here what are we getting? So we are not getting any values updated. Got my question? So why it is not getting updated? Sulani, any idea? Any guess? So ultimately this is the place from where are we getting the data, right? And now I just made few modifications to this existing data table. And now this data table has been given source as a data page, and the data page has to pull all the results. But this value is not being updated.
Yeah.
So let me create new work object ID. Submit it, again submit. So now are we getting this value updated? So in this case, we are still seeing the old data, and here we are seeing the updated data. Did you find the difference? The thing here is, once the data page has been created, the source rule will not be executed. Let me show you. So here we are getting the correct data as per our expectations. Now I'm trying to make few modifications. I'm trying to delete the first one also. So the first thing should be displayed like Maharaja Hospital. I'm saving this, and I'm going to CHG49. Refresh. What are we getting? Is that deleted? No. And go to the previous one. Just check, or if you want me to refresh also, I'll do that. So what are we getting? So we are not getting anything. So for the first time, whenever it is hitting the database, it will be pulling the data, it will be pulling some set of data and putting it in the clipboard. And once the data has been ready on the clipboard, if you're trying to make any modifications, if you're trying to make any of the modifications, if you refresh this, as I told you, if you refresh this, before loading this section, it will be just checking for the source rule here. The source rule has to see the data page. Data page is already existing in the clipboard by this time. Okay, data page is already there in the clipboard by this time, and then data page will not be executed. Data page will not be executed, meaning it will not be executing the report definition, and it will not be retrieving the latest data. Okay, so for the next work object, what it has been doing, so if I'm trying to create the new work object ID, it has to hit the data page again for the first time. So hitting the data page again and hitting the report definition source rule. So report definition has to hit the database, and by that time whatever the data we have in the database, that will be pulled out and it put it in the database. Now if I make any modifications in the data table and refresh the section, the data page is already existing, no? So it will not be having with the latest data. Understood? Or you want me to explain again?
Understood.
Uma?
Yes, Chandra.
Suppose if I'm creating this particular work object, particular data page to the requester and save this. And now if I create 5 work object IDs, after the for the first work object ID, we will be getting the latest data as per the database table, and it will be showing it in the first 5 work object IDs. And in the sixth work object, during the time of sixth work object, if I'm trying to make few modifications in the database, and if I want to see that updated data in the sixth work object, it will not be possible. Why? Because by the time we are executing this work object ID 6, data page is already ready on the clipboard. So if the data page is ready on the clipboard, rule will not be executed, it will not be hitting the database again. So in this process, it will not be able to pull out the fresh data. So whatever the old data we have in the data page, that has to be shown there. So that is the disadvantage also. So the advantage here is it will not be hitting the database for multiple times, and the disadvantage is it will not be hitting the database for the multiple times. That is the thing. And if we want to delete that, got my point? And we are in this data page now. Let me show you. This is the requester, right? I'm trying to create new work object ID. So this is the thing that this is the latest data that we are getting now. And now I'm trying to make few modifications. I'm trying to delete this also. So first, this should become Tirupati. So save this, and now I'm trying to create new work object ID. So I'm expecting Tirupati to the beginning one, but still we are getting this. So if we create some hundreds of work object IDs also, we'll be getting the same data. We will not be getting the updated one. Got my point? Why? Because this particular data page should be there for this complete operator login. So if we log off and log in again new fresh data page will be created, and in this process it will be pulling out the fresh data. Then only we can able to see the updated data. Understood? And if there are any cases where you cannot able to log off, and if you want to see the updated data, here we are not seeing the updated data, right? But still I want to see the updated data without logging off. Then what we have to do? So did you get my question? If I just create the work data page with the node level, let us say. So this particular data page is with the node level. I'm just saving this. Okay. So I have created one data page with the node level, and this node and the data for the first work object ID execution, I can able to see this data. Maybe after for the second thing also I'll be using the same data. And now I want to make few modifications in the database table. And for the third work object ID, will I be getting the latest database table data? Anyone of you? So got my question? Suppose we three are developers under one team, and I have created the initial work object ID, and the data page has been created at the node level. I have created few work object IDs today, and now I have to make few modifications into the database table, and I have to get some extra values in the drop down. So I'll be adding all these in my data table. So it will be working fine in the data table. Now, if I still run the new work object ID, I'll be seeing the old data. Why? Because the data page is already existing and it will be there for the 24 hours. So if I'm trying to create n number of work object IDs within this 24 hours, the data page will already be there in the clipboard, and it will not be hitting the database again and again. So in turn, it will not be getting the fresh data. So if we want to see this latest data, what we have to do is we have to go to that particular data page and we have to remove that from the clipboard. So for that, you have to go to load management and we have to click on clear data page. Why? Because in order to just check for the modifications in the data table, I cannot able to wait for 24 hours. As a developer, we cannot able to wait. Okay, for that, what we have to do is we have to go to the particular data page and click on flush all. If I just click and select this particular data page will be gone from the from the level, I mean from the scope. It might be either thread, requester, or scope. Okay, so if I'm trying to remove this data page forcefully from the load management, and if someone of you is requesting the new work object ID, and you will be responsible for creating the new data page, and in this process it will be hitting the database again, and it will be pulling out of the fresh data. So this is how we have to use it. So load management is also very important. If you want to remove any of the data page, we have to go for this clear data page. Why? Because if we are having the data page still in the clipboard, we cannot able to see the updated data. So just to see the updated data, first we have to remove the data page. If the data page has been removed, whenever this particular source is being executed, it will be just checking whether the data page is there in the clipboard or not, and clipboard will not, I mean clipboard will not be having this data page, and so it will be hitting the database, and it will be pulling out the fresh data, and it will be storing out on the clipboard, and it will be there for the next 24 hours. Got my point? So that's the importance of this one. Understood, both of you?
Yes, sir.
So now we have to discuss about this refresh strategy also. As I told you, the data page data will be there for default 24 hours. It might be either requester, thread, or the scope. It might be anything. Okay, it might be anything. It will be off 24 hours by default. And if we want to have the, sorry, if we are working in a requirement where the data will be refreshed for every 1 hour. Okay, suppose like cricket scores. So in the cricket score, if the data has to be updated for every 1 minute or every 2 minutes, or the weather, everything. So any kind of data which will be continuously refreshing, and I want to refresh the data for next 24 hours or for 1 week. Suppose if you're applying for a credit card, or if you're applying for an ATM pin change, if you're requesting for that, even though if you're requesting now, you have to wait for 4 business days. Okay, they will be setting some time. So that will be different based on here. If they're putting 4 here, even if the data is has been updated from their end, it will not be reflected. Why? Because data will not be refreshed. So in this kind of scenarios where you want to have this data refreshed in particular period of time, you have to define it here. So using this refresh strategy, we can able to refresh the data in the period what we are giving it. So refreshing meaning, if I'm just giving the refresh strategy as 2 hours, let us say I'm giving this refresh strategy of 2 hours. Although if I'm trying to create one work object ID now at 9 a.m., it will be accessible by default for 24 hours. And if the time reaches, if the server time reaches to 11 a.m., that is like 10:59, then automatically this data page has to be removed out from the clipboard, and then it has to hit the database again. It will not be hitting the database again. So first what I'm trying to do is, if we're trying to give the refresh strategy as 2 hours, and if I am the person who is requesting for this particular data page, if I'm trying to create the work object ID from my end, then at 9 a.m. this data page will be created, and at 11 o'clock this data page will be automatically removed from the clipboard. And if I want to create one more new work object ID after 11 o'clock, then it has to hit the database again, it has to pull the data, and it has to store it. Okay, so all the time after the refresh strategy time, it has to hit the database those many times. Got my point? If I'm trying to give it like 1 minute, so whatever the data I'm giving here, it will be there by default for only 1 minute. And if you want to use this data after 1 minute, you have to request again. Only option is that you have to, if you create the work object ID, it will be sending one request, it will be hitting the database, it will be storing the data onto the clipboard, and the life of that page will be like 2 days or 3 days, whatever the thing we are defining in the refresh here. Got my point? And this refresh strategy, what are the thing we are discussing, like refresh strategy, this is meant for security reasons. So by default, it will data has to be removed after 24 hours. This is just for the security. And if the data seems to be much secure and I want to remove it for only 1 minute or 2 days or 1 day, then we have to define it here. And as I told you, if you're trying to make this as an editable meaning I myself as defining this data page has to be used by myself, and there is no security involved. So that is the case, it will not be showing the node level here. And if it is of editable, there will not be anything like refresh strategy. So if we go to the load management, there will not be any refresh strategy applicable for this editable section. So editable itself is like a less security. So if you're trying to make any modifications to the data page, that should be like a less secured feature. So that's why there will not be any refresh strategy applicable, and there will not be the node scope as well. So these are all the important things. Understood, both of you?
Yes, sir.
In the next class, I'll explain you how to create one new data page and how to create the report definition new. I think we have already created the new report definition. And in this new data page, we'll be linking this new report definition and we'll be giving this as a source to the dropdown. So once the sources are given, it will be automatically loading these values. And if I select West Bengal, I should be getting the hospitals related to that state only. And for that, we'll be working with the cascadings and the parameters. Maybe in the next 2 classes, we'll be taking to complete this cascading. That's also very important and interesting as well. Interviews, they'll be asking you many questions on these data pages, report definitions, and these activities and this cascading. This is very, very important business scenario. So that's why we're taking enough time, and we'll take 2 more days for this cascading as well. So understood, right? Both
Yes,
of
sir.
you? Yeah. Uma, clear, right?
Yes, Chandra. Yeah, I'm following.
Yeah. Thank you. We'll meet tomorrow.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.